What do you get when you combine a journalist who covered Georgia football for decades and a businessman who grew up an Auburn fan and even had an up-close and personal look when he walked onto the team? Find out by listening to Sidelines and Headlines, featuring Blake Giles, the retired journalist, and Jim Hardin, the dedicated Auburn fan. Is this another version of The Odd Couple? You decide as you listen in each week to hear timely discussion of college football and high school football, and follow the rabbit trails where they lead to various and sundry items of interest. Here's the latest version of Sidelines and Headlines, available on your favorite podcast host, including Spotify, Apple, and Amazon. And if you want to see the guys, check out the Sidelines and Headlines YouTube channel. Subscribe to never miss an episode, and tell your friends about us. Stay with us for this week's episode. Hey, this is Blake Giles.
This is Jim Hardin.
This is Sidelines
and Headlines.
And it's, I think, our second edition for this second year. So, Jim, here we are, year number 2 of our podcast.
We got big things, big ideas.
Yeah.
We just got to put it all together. We appreciate everybody watching. And we've been talking about this a little bit, and Blake agreed to do it. I'm gonna pepper you with some questions about your life and career. Go ahead.
Well, I have spent my life asking questions more than I have answering questions.
I want to make you. No, well, you told me a story, and you and I kind of hit it off with Rotary Club. I'm kind of weird. I'm a little younger than you. I won't tell them your age, but I like the history. You know, I know things about things that happened back maybe when you were coming up, when you were growing up in Athens, when you were at the University of Georgia. And nobody my age really cares about, you know, Andy Johnson or Mike Cabin, or I mean, we were too young to really.
Yeah.
But you told me a cool story. Your dad basically was the manager of the airport here in Athens, right? And you said sometimes by default your mother became the caterer for the football for the opposing team.
Well, to my knowledge, it only happened. I can only confirm one time that it happened.
Okay, you know where I'm going with this. I'm not going to say the year, but because
I'll go ahead and say it. I'll go ahead and say it.
50 or 51?
1950, Georgia opened the season with Maryland. They played on September the 23rd. And of course, in 1950, the state of Athens at the time, a much smaller community, and where do you go to find catering facilities for a football team that comes to Athens to play? And they were looking for box lunches to have on their flight home. And so my dad, just being the charter manager for Southern Airways, just decided, okay, this is a way for us to make a little extra money. And he got my mom to prepare all of the sack lunches for the Maryland football team so they could eat that on their flight home, and she did. And I was born the next day.
The next day, Blake was born. Was that 50 or 51?
1950.
50. And Georgia won the game. I looked it up.
They did win the game. They beat Maryland. And so that was my connection with Georgia football. Started actually before I was born.
Well, that's pretty awesome. And so, your dad, you basically grew up at the airport.
I did. There was a red brick house, 2-story brick house on the premises of the airport property. It's since been torn down probably 40 years ago. And when I was about 2 years old, we moved into that house. I know where we lived before that, and actually was in the house that we lived in before that, but it's been torn down too. It was across from Gaines School Elementary School. So all my childhood homes have been destroyed. But we lived there, and that was part of his pay as being the manager for the county. As he was a county manager for the airport, and then he was the station manager for Southern Airways. So he was on the government payroll and he was on private payroll. Eventually he left Southern Airways and went to work full time with the county as the airport manager. And he told this story at his retirement, and now I don't know whether this is true or if he made it up, but this is a story he told. He talked about going in to negotiate with the county commissioner, who was Jim Hardin at the time, Georgia Tech graduate. And he says, here I am, a Winder High School graduate, going in to negotiate with a Georgia Tech man. And he said, I sat down in there and I said, Mr. Holland, I want you to write down on a piece of paper what you think ought to get paid, because he was fixing to go full time. He'd always been part time before. And he said, I'll write down on a piece of paper what I think ought to get paid, and then we'll start negotiating from there. Well, so he wrote it down, and Mr. Holland gave him his piece of paper, and my dad was about to give him his, and he looked at it, and Mr. Holland's number was higher than the number my dad had written down. So he just looked at him and said, Mr. Holland, I'm sorry, we're just so far apart. I'm just going to have to accept your figure. So anyway, that's the story told. And then later on, he started a Hertz rent-a-car business too. So
in conjunction with out the airport.
Yeah, he had the Hertz business. I've got pictures somewhere.
That was back before Uber.
That's right. I've got a picture somewhere of him and my mom with O.J. Simpson. You know, O.J. Simpson was
the Hertz ad.
He was a spokesperson for Hertz.
That's right.
So,
and you told me something. You don't think I'm weird? I even remember this stuff just in our casual conversations. But you and your wife Jan have known each other since childhood, and y'all are members of Winterville Baptist Church, and that's the only church. Y'all been members since you were kids,
right.
And it's the only church you've ever been a member of.
That's exactly. We're dinosaurs and unicorns in that respect, and that's the only church we've ever been a member of. I've known my wife since she was 2 years old, and the joke I tell is I was 7. By the time she was 7, I was 12. By the time she was 12, I was 17. By the time she was 17, I was interested. It took me 15 years to get her to go out with me. So, but we've been married 53 years now.
3 children?
3 children and 5 grandchildren.
5 grandchildren. Well, that's just unbelievable that y'all been at the same church that long. We used to joke about my grandmother, God rest her soul. You know, she would change church about every 6 months, and Joe was, you know, she said she'd move her letter. That's what she called it.
That's right.
And then she'd get in there with the women, they'd all get to fussing and fighting, and then she'd move to another church. You know, it'd be somewhere 50 years. And the fascinating, you've written 2 books.
I've been involved with 2 books. I wrote with Coach Dooley, Tales of the 1980 Georgia Bulldogs, and that was written on the 25th anniversary of the 1980 season, so that means it came out in 2005. And then I was also involved in publishing a book, Kelly's Boys, about Coburn Kelly, youth director of the YMCA. Al Epting, who was later a youth director at the Y, he and I did a lot of the research on that book, and we tried to track down as many boys who had been Y boys, and also to look into Kelly's background. He had been to the Amazon as a young man, and I found his partner who went to the Amazon, spent a day with him and learned all about that trip. And he'd also served in the Coast Guard and the United States Navy. He actually got drafted by the Army. He said, I've already served in the Coast Guard, you can't draft me. And they did. They discharged him within a few weeks. But then when World War II broke out, he enlisted in the Navy. So he's one of the rare people who served in 3 branches of service. But anyway, I wrote a first draft on that, and then the well-known newspaper columnist Darrell Huckabee polished it up, and that's the final volume that was put out.
Well, that's what I was, you know, growing up in Athens. You know, what I've always, even before I lived in Athens, I always just was kind of the whole Athens high, going back, you know, so many great athletes, you know, Fran Tarkenton and all that. But I think Fran Tarkenton mentions in his the documentary on the SEC network, Coburn Kelly.
Right.
That book is fascinating. Just Coburn Kelly must have been just an unbelievable. It's like he had a spell cast on.
Well, he was, aside from my dad, he probably had the most influence over me than any man in my life, and he was a very unforgettable figure, and we all thought he walked on water. One of the boys, when I interviewed him, said when he thinks about God, the image of Coburn Kelly's face is what he thinks about. But he just had a certain way about him that he was so devoted to the guys. And you know, when you're in that age range of 8 to 13, you're very impressionable, and you come along at that age, and he was, you know, everybody's always interested in playing sports and activity, and he took advantage of that and taught us a lot of Bible lessons and about Jesus. And he did something called the Good Thought Notebook. He'd give us a little sheet of mimeograph sheet each week with good thoughts on it and ask you to do a little notebook. And I've got mine somewhere around here. I've been looking to find it, but I cannot find it. But kind of things that stick with you.
Well, one of the most unbelievable things, you and I talked about this, were about the summer trips he took out west. You said you went on one.
I went on the Canada trip. He did a 3-week trip to California at the beginning of the summer, right after school was out. And then he would do it at the end of the summer, a 2-week trip to Canada. Now, later, he added a 1-week trip to Florida right in the middle of the summer. And I did the Canadian trip and the Florida trip. My brother did the California trip. And basically, he had a bus, and he would load up 40 boys on that bus, ages 3rd grade to about 8th grade, just spread out, not 4 or 5 of each age group. And he would take them, and usually he would take one teenager or one assistant along with him to help out, like Jake Scott, the all-pro safety, the Miami Dolphins. He was one of those who went with us. He was on the Florida trip that I went on. I remember that. But he would go along with us. And then he would just leave Athens and come back 3 weeks later and bring the boys back. And there was no contact essentially between him and the parents. They just sent their boys off and said, well, bring it back in 3 weeks, Kelly.
Can you imagine some of these helicopter mamas nowadays?
Oh, it was a different world back then. Different world. We didn't have cell phones and all that kind of stuff, and no way to stay in contact. There was even the story told about one boy who had to have his appendix removed while he's on the trip. And the story was told that Kelly rigged up this gurney up at the top, hanging down from the rafters of the bus, drove him to the hospital, left him, said, we'll come back in a few days and pick you up.
It's unheard of. Well, he must have been a very, I don't even know what the right word is, kind of figure.
He was an incredible figure, and the book is available. You can go to the YMCA and get a copy of it. It's still out there. It's still current. There's one mistake in it. And somewhere in the very beginning, it says he was the fleet boxing champion. And in all my research, I never saw any evidence that he was a fleet boxing champion.
Well, he died at age 50.
He was, 54, 55 years old when he died. It was in 1968. 68, the spring of 68, right before the Masters. He just suddenly died.
And I don't think people realize, I know it from talking to you and living out that way, he lived out there on Mitchell Bridge Road at, what was it called, Pine Tops?
Pine Tops.
Yeah.
It's where High Ridge and River Bottom are now, those 2 subdivisions,
right,
was where the Athens YMCA Pine Tops camp was. There was a big barracks out there that would probably sleep about 60 boys, had a big gymnasium in it. And then there was a dining hall, and then a small athletic field, and then just a lot of trails and stuff.
Did I get this wrong? The chapel that's back behind the YMCA.
He did build that chapel.
He built that and it was moved over there.
Right. He built the chapel. There was a big rock outcropping out there. And a friend of mine, Mike Simpson's dad, went out and actually surveyed it and said, yeah, you could build on top of this. We do a little bit of grading, and this will be a great foundation. And he built a chapel out there. And then when the Y sold that was the one thing they did salvage, and it's now out behind the athletic fields of the YMCA over on Hawthorne.
So when you went through all that, you're a Y boy, Athens High School. Talk about, and one thing I wanted to touch on is just, and you and I both read the book, The Crimson and Gold, I forget the guy that wrote it, Clegg.
Yeah,
Just about the integration, the Bernie Harris, Athens High coming together. You kind of lived through that.
We were in that. If you were born when I was born, and by the time you got to your teenage years, the civil rights movement was in its really peak heydays at the beginning of integration, and it was a very turbulent time. My parents raised me in such a way that I was never really concerned about the color of the skin, but it was still a difficult thing to go through. And when I was a senior in high school, we had a very marked minority of blacks who had come and enrolled at Athens High School by then.
They just came, they kind of trickled in there for a while, then they mandated it.
Well, then in 70, 1970, fall of 71 was when they consolidated the two schools, Athens High and Bernie Harris, into, this is the fall of 70, I'm sorry, and Clark Central.
Yeah.
Became Clark Central. The fall of 69 was when Athens High had that great team that tied Valdosta for the state championship. Bernie Harris had an excellent program during those years too. They were 8-2 as well as I remember, the 68, 69, and 70 seasons, or 69 season. And then they merged, and going forward from 70 forward, it was Clark Central, and then Cedar Shows came along in the mid-70s.
Well, you told me, we were talking about that book, not to get off on something different, but that game you referenced when they went down to Valdosta and tied them, you said there was a mistake in that book. You said, I said, yeah, they in the book it said they rode
DC-3s.
DC-3s down to the, flew them down to Valdosta.
They flew in something called a Martin 404, which was a different kind of plane. I don't think Southern was still flying the DC-3s that late. They had taken them out of commission.
Only a guy that grew up at the airport.
Well, I remember flying in those DC-3s. My dad used to be a reservist, and he had active duty over in Charleston, South Carolina, periodically. And maybe twice a year, I'd fly over there just to spend some time with him. And I'd just go by myself. And he knew all the stewardesses on the flight planes, and they'd watch out for me. So I'd get over to Charleston, spend some time with him, and then fly back. And there used to be one stewardess in particular. She got a hankering for me. She kind of liked me, and she'd bring me comic books and stuff.
Better be careful. Did Jan know about that? I want to talk about some individual guys I know you knew and, through your career as a sports writer, but the guy that kind of in your age group, I think he was a year or so younger, was Andy Johnson.
He was actually a couple of years younger. Andy was, let's see, I was born in 50. I think he was born in 52. And he graduated in 70. So he was 2 years younger than I was. I played one game with Andy. I think probably the last football game I ever played was with the YMCA. And I was like an 8th grader, and we went over and played the Monroe area junior varsity. The Y boys did, and Andy was just a 7th grader at the time, but he was our quarterback in the game. And that's how advanced he was as an athlete. But I knew him all along, and he and my brother were the same age. In fact, my brother struck him out in Little League one time, which was, and I was watching, I was at a senior league practice, and Andy hit like a 200-foot foul ball that was way out of there. And the next pitch, my brother struck him out.
Well, even before I ever knew I would live in Athens or be around Athens, you think about Fran Tarkin, you think about Andy Johnson, he's just a guy that, he played 10 years. I think I heard the story, didn't he make it 10 years so he got the pension?
He could have. I don't really know how long he played all the time with the Patriots. He was a running back in the NFL. Got some game balls over the years for being an outstanding performer. He was certainly not an all-pro performer. Ray Goff told me that Chuck Fairbanks told him that Andy Johnson was the best athlete he'd ever seen.
For those of y'all who don't know who Chuck Fairbanks is, he was coach at Oklahoma, and
he coached the Patriots.
Yeah.
So
coming up, when did you first get a hankering and realize you wanted to be in the journalism business?
Well, I had always expressed, had some interest in writing, and I remember even in the 8th grade, my Little League coach gave me some encouragement. He happened to be a substitute English teacher, and he gave me some encouragement about something I'd written. And then I was just an avid reader of the sports pages. We received both the Atlanta Journal and the Atlanta Constitution every day at my house. My mom she read the papers from front to back, and I read the sports pages all the way through. And that was back in the time when Jesse Outlaw was the sports editor of the Constitution and Furman Bisher for the Atlanta Journal. And of course I thought Bisher was an excellent writer, and he was a guy that in some respects I tried to pattern myself after. There were ways I would try to imitate what he wrote. But when I got to high school, I was not a very good athlete. I tried out for baseball when I was a sophomore and got cut. I never did try out again for any varsity sports. But I was interested in sports, and so I was a sports editor for our little high school newspaper, Thumbtack Tribune. And the day I graduated, I went down to the Athens paper to see Louis Grizzard and say, "You need to hire me." And he said, "Who are you?" And he was on his way out then. He was about to leave to go to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and work for them. But I did know Chuck Perry, and I started with him about a year and a half later.
So that was right when you got out of high school. So
well, I started with a newspaper when I was a sophomore in college, August 11th, 1969. I had actually written so few little things like a correspondent for him about church league softball or things like that, just sent them some things in. And so I had stayed in contact with him. And then I happened to see Chuck on campus one day in the summer near Park Hall on the UGA campus. Now here's what, I don't know why I was on campus or why he was on campus that day, but I said, "Hey, you got any jobs open?" He said, "Well, as a matter of fact, my sports writer's got to go to Vietnam, so I got a job." So I came down and applied. And
so you went right in knowing you wanted to major in journalism.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And is that the only encounter you ever had with Grizzard?
I got to know him over the years later, and got to know him. Yeah, he was a funny guy, unique guy, very, very gifted writer.
So did you do anything with the Red and Black?
I wrote one article for the Red and Black while I was at the University of Georgia. I think it was an assignment for a class, and I wrote an article on the news page about the first female campus police officer for the University of Georgia Police. And that's the only article I ever wrote for the Red and Black.
So when you graduated, you went on through school and you graduated, you kind of worked along. You just went right into the...
I started when I was a sophomore, and I stayed from 69 to 96. So I just graduated and stayed with them. I got a little bump in pay when I graduated, but just stayed with it. And I was sports writer for a couple of years. I was a sports editor before I graduated college, and held that job until '83, became associate editor for about 6 years, and then went back into sports for several years until '96.
And not jump ahead a little bit, we'll come back. But when you retired, you went back in with the Coney Enterprise.
Well, I didn't retire.
Okay.
In '96, they told me they didn't want me anymore. I got bumped off. Somebody came in higher on the food chain, and we clashed, and I got fired. So I was out of the newspaper business for about 10 years.
Oh, that's right. I
and then
I didn't know the amount of time.
Yeah,
I know it was
and
that
during that time period, I was in financial services, which was not my real calling, but I managed to make a living out of it to some extent. But then I went to work with the Oconee Enterprise for about 8 years and became the editor of the Enterprise until I reached age 66 and retired.
Well, my ADD kicking in, jumping around. You and I were chatting. There's a picture I'm pointing down in your basement of you and Herschel and Eric Dickerson. There's a couple other people at the night. I guess that was in the after the '82 season.
That's right. That was at the Heisman. It was.
And you just casually told me I used to have a Heisman vote.
I did.
That's pretty cool.
I did vote for the Heisman for several years, and I voted for it that year when Herschel won. I voted one year on the Associated Press top 20. The year after Georgia won the national championship in 1980, I was one of the AP voters for the 1981 season. So Clemson owes me a debt of gratitude because I helped vote for them as the national championship at the end of the season.
Well, at that point that year, I saw something on Danny Ford a couple of days ago. They were kind of like Georgia were the year before. They won them all.
Exactly.
Couldn't deny them.
Yeah.
So I know there's probably too many to name. You mentioned a funny story to me one time. You told me a funny story about interviewing Archie Manning on the bus. And
that would have been in, I think, 1970. Archie came to Athens in 1970 season. And, back then you didn't get to see these guys on television and all. So that was a big deal to get to see Archie play. I mean, he was a legendary figure. So it was a big game, and he came, and they beat Georgia that day. And so I was, at that time, usually assigned to the visiting locker room to go and interview the coaches and players. And so everybody wanted to talk to Archie, of course, and Johnny Vault was the head coach, and he said, well, he's already on the bus. Well, they were all grumbling, and they all had stories the next day about how Archie was unavailable. Well, I just walked up to the bus and got on the bus. And I said, hey, can I talk to you for a minute? And talked to Archie and got a little interview and came back next. We told my sports editor, Chuck Perry, I said, I got an interview with Archie, but I'm the only one. So we had this big exclusive interview in there. And, you know, and I got to thinking, they're going to ride to the airport on this bus. Even if they leave, I'll have a way to get back. So I wasn't worried about that bus left, you know. So.
Well, all kind of people pop into my mind. I know. I'm just going to throw names at you and tell me. Irk Russell, do you have any?
Oh, yeah.
With Irk?
Irk is a guy, he was a man who, whenever you were with him, you think, there's no other place in the world I'd rather be than right here with Irk Russell. He just had that charismatic appeal about him. And, you know, I got to know him gradually in the time period of covering Georgia. You know, it's interesting, in the time period when he was here, Coach Dooley gave him a lot of leeway. He actually had his own radio show as an assistant coach, which was pretty rare and everything. And Coach Dooley used to give us a lot of leeway as to interviewing the assistant coaches, so I got to know a lot of them, and he was one of them we got to know, and so I interviewed him many times. It's interesting now, if you watch television coverage, they talk about the coordinators a lot. They'll even talk about special teams coaches a lot. You go back and look at the 1980 Georgia-Florida game, and you can find it online. They never mentioned a single defensive coach in the whole game. And Irk, of course, was well known as Georgia's defensive coordinator, and Shanahan was the offensive coordinator for Florida, and made some radical changes in the game plan that week against Georgia. It's never even mentioned. That's just how the TV media's kind of changed their coverage over the years.
I read something about Irk. People don't know this about Irk. Again, I know weird things. He won the state championship as a high school coach at Grady High School when he was 27 years old, like 1950, whatever. Mm-hmm. And he, you know, he's an Auburn guy. People forget that. He went to Auburn. He coached at Auburn. Mm-hmm. And then he.
How many sports did he letter in at Auburn?
I think he may have been the last three-sport letterman before Bo Jackson. That might not be true. I think he tennis and baseball and football, I think.
Yeah, I know he lettered in those three. And I was thinking he might have played basketball too. I know Coach Dooley played basketball. But yeah, Irk was a very good tennis player as a young man. And he was a terrible golfer. He didn't even play golf when he was at Georgia. Coach Dooley used to have a Sportswriter's outing once a year. They called it the Dooley Poss Open. Bobby Poss, Sr., was help underwrite it, and they'd invite all the sports writers. They'd go to a chalet up on Lake Burton or somewhere, and they'd have a round of golf or two and have a little tournament and all that. And one of those days, the assistant coaches all had to play. And Irk was always playing out of somebody else's bag because he didn't even own golf clubs. He didn't really take up golf seriously until after he retired, I'm told. And Jean, his wife, said, you're spending entirely too much time around the house. You've got to find something else to do. And so he took up golf and fell in love with it.
He was a character. I met him and was around him. I actually went down to Georgia Southern on a recruiting trip when I was in high school, and it was just, you know, looking back on it, you know, we were all in awe. Like you said, when Irk was in the room, everybody. Yeah. What about Hugh Durham?
Well, Hugh was, it took me a while and for me and Hugh to form a relationship. He got hired in about 83, I think, and 80. I don't know when he was hired. It's earlier than that. But when he first came to Athens, and he was, when you do an interview with Hugh, if it was a one-on-one interview, he's going to want to turn it into a conversation. He's going to want to talk about what's happening in the news, all kind of stuff, and we used to joke about, you go down to see Hugh and disappear into this black hole and come out of there, and you might have 2 quotes to use. But then on the post-game interviews with the radio, they'd be interviewing him, and he was like gold. And so you're always hanging around for the post-game interview because I'm going to get enough stuff for a week of stories with him. But Hugh was a smart man. He was brilliant with numbers. He could figure out shooting percentages just like that. He just had something in his mind, and had that raspy old voice, that he had. And
he's still around. Live down in Jackson.
Still around. I hopefully get to see him once a year. They usually comes up for a game in Georgia, and get to see him. And
I was talking about this with a friend of mine the other day. The guys now. I mean, nothing against Kirby or anybody, but it's like, it's almost like those guys just born to coach. You're like football robots in a way. You don't have the characters like you used to. You're talking about basketball coaches. Wimp, Sanderson, Sonny Smith. Those guys were hilarious.
Well, part of that may be the way they relate to the media these days. Back then, I could get a one-on-one interview with Vince Dooley or with Hugh Durham. You can't do that with Kirby. Or some of those guys, they're so focused, got so much going on, and the only people that get to do them interviews is those who pay them. That's the TV people.
Yep, that's right.
So,
what about when we interviewed Coach Charles Winslet a few weeks ago? He was talking about playing baseball at Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that era, Coach Big Jim Watley and the.
Well, my first encounter with Jim Watley was when I was in Little League Baseball. He gave my dad a glove to give to me. He knew my dad at the airport. In fact, my dad told this story that Southern Airways, where he worked, a little bit understaffed, so when they were out working a flight, they had an answer machine. Well, in Athens, an answer machine was pretty rare.
Yeah.
So he said those assistant football coaches figured out that they had an answer machine at Southern Airways, so they were always making joke calls to Coach Russell and Shoemaker, and not Coach Russell, but Coach Watley and Shoemaker and Towns, and they're making funny calls over there. But when I got to Georgia, and of course he was covering the head baseball coach going back to the 50s through early 70s, and covered their games. I actually was the official scorer for one game at Foley Field. It ended in a tie because there were no lights, and the game was called on account of darkness. And I remember I made a call on a hit or an error, and he poked his head out of the dugout. He wasn't happy with the call. But we got off. Coach Watley and I got off to a kind of a rocky start. I made a dumb comment in a story, and he told those reporters, those players, that don't talk to that Giles fella. But after a while, we managed to form a relationship, and we got along just fine.
Speaking of lights, you told me this. I didn't understand this. And talking about when Clark Central became Athens High Clark Central, Sanford Stadium had lights until Coach Dooley. Coach Dooley took down the lights.
It was actually Coach Eves who came as athletic director. And I think the last year that Sanford Stadium had lights was either 63 or 64.
But Clark Central or Athens High School played their home games there.
They played their home games in Sanford Stadium. And in 55, when they played Valdosta in the state championship, it was played in Sanford Stadium. And I may have gone to that game. I would have been just barely 5 years old. I remember going to a night game in Sanford Stadium with my dad and a big crowd. Was that it? I don't know. I don't obviously remember anything about the game.
I told you that. My daddy's from Rockmart, Georgia. He didn't play then. He was a little younger than that. But I'm pretty sure Athens beat Rockmart in the week before they played Valdosta in the state championship. But they had, but the other part of that was Georgia didn't play a night game again until Clemson in '82, right? That's
exactly right. There were no light standards at all. And in fact, I broke a story in that spring when the Athletic Association announced they were going to put up lights. And of course, it was television. TV was becoming a big thing, and they needed to have lights to get the night games. And of course, they opened it up with that Clemson game that night. And it was because the game was played on Labor Day night on Monday. It was unusual in that we did not have a combined staff to work the game, so we basically had to do double duty. And so when that game was over with, I didn't go home until the next morning about 10 o'clock. I just stayed all night long working on stories and stuff. So that's just.
I remember another part of that too, riding by Clark Central and looking down there at the field, and I just assumed they'd been playing games on that field since 1920 or something.
Yeah.
They started, that's 64, 65.
64, somewhere. 65 might have been the first year, because they played in the state finals, of course, that year against Valdosta at Athens High Stadium.
Did, well, again, we go on and on. Talk about, you wrote the book about Coach Dooley. Talk about that. What was that experience like?
Well, you know, I got a call from Claude Felton, and you know, about 2003, 2004, somewhere in that time frame. The publisher had contacted him and said, who can write this book? And of course, I had been there and covered them, and he knew that I could do the job, so I signed on with Coach Dooley. We had an agreement, and then I did most of the writing. It says by Vince Dooley with Blake Giles, but I did most of the writing, and it's pretty obvious from the way it's written. And so Coach Dooley and I spent a lot of time together reliving the season, and him giving me his memories and feedback from it. And then I managed to talk to Irk and to Bill Lewis, who's the defensive coach, and I'm trying to remember who the other coaches I might have talked to. And then I talked to a lot of the players, and that was great to reconnect with the players after, you know, 20-something years to just, and they had a lot of great stories, some of which I had heard and some of which I had not heard, and just, it was great to put that together. And then just basically the book came out of that.
Well, talking about how the coaches, not as many characters or whatever, personalities and coaches, I mean, regardless of what you think about Coach Dooley as a coach, I mean, he's obviously an excellent coach, but there were a lot of different sides to him, and he had a lot of different interests. People refer to him as kind of a Renaissance man.
Yeah.
You know, he did, and
well,
of course
Barbara always said she has knowledge a mile wide and an inch deep, and Coach Dooley has knowledge a mile deep and an inch wide. And he had two main things that he was really fascinated with, and one was history, particularly Civil War history, and the other was gardening. And you've been in my home, you know that I'm a gardener as well, and so he and I, we shared that passion and had some enjoyable experiences over the year comparing notes about different techniques of gardening and things like that. I've never had a hydrangea named after me like Coach Dooley has, but we had a mutual friend in Michael Durr, world-renowned horticulturist, and so he and Michael, they went all over the world doing horticultural type things. But yeah, he was a very interesting guy. I had an experience when he was recruiting Herschel Walker. I spent a day with him. We left Athens, and I rode with him down to Wrightsville. He was going to speak at the high school football banquet. Of course, it gave him another opportunity to be around Herschel, of course. And so we had that trip, and I remember we went by way of Augusta because he had a pastor friend over in Augusta that he wanted to go and spend some time with. So I got to meet him, and we visited, spent some time together, and then came back. And then when it came time to leave, he actually sent me back on a different route with a different driver, because I think there were some key recruiting moments about to happen, and he sent me back and everything. But it was great to spend time with him.
Well, he was quite a character. It was fun. You and I ran into Barbara a few months ago.
Mm-hmm.
She's still doing good.
Yeah, yeah.
I've read both your books, by the way. You know, it's funny. I read the book about the Coach Dooley book, the book you wrote with Coach Dooley years ago, and I'd forgotten I'd read it, I bought it again on Amazon.
Well, thank you very much.
I started reading. I'm like, I've read this before. I know all these stories.
There you go. Well, you know, Barbara wrote a book too.
Yeah, I read her book.
Put Me In, Coach.
Put Me In, Coach.
It's an excellent book.
Yeah.
It's kind of stream of consciousness, but it's a great little read.
I've read it. It's been a while. I probably need to read it again.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot to ask you about. I mean, it would go on and on, but the guy a lot of people consider the greatest Georgia Bulldog, Dan McGill. Did you have a relationship with Dan McGill?
Yeah. I knew Dan, of course. He had many hats he wore when I first started. He was the tennis coach, and he was a sports information director. He was a director of the Bulldog Club, and he wore so many different hats. And of course, he was a great promoter, and he was a great promoter of this tennis program. And a guy that I graduated high school with, Danny Birchmore, went to Georgia and was an All-American performer. And that was in the early 70s. They had not too long previously built the courts that they had over there, which is in the parking lot right behind Foley Field,
yep,
and right across from the Coliseum. And so tennis was just beginning to develop some following. And Coach McGill brought in some of the top teams from the country. Miami came in. They had a player named Eddie Dibbs, who was one of the top-ranked players in the country. And back then, they didn't have any bleachers on the hillside, and there was no gates. People could come and sit on the hillside. Well, the students would come, and they'd bring coolers of beer. Well, of course, they got pretty well jacked up, and that created quite a rowdy atmosphere, and that was the beginning of what has continued to this day to be a great tradition of the fan following of Georgia tennis by the fans here in Athens and
it's
students.
It's not like that everywhere.
No, it's not.
Still, it's not like that.
It's not like that everywhere. And really, college tennis is a great spectacle. Doubles has got 3 matches going at once. Singles has got 6 matches going at once. There's always something going on. The momentum is going back and forth, and it's just, and the level of play is a high level of tennis. I mean, it's not like watching Roger Federer play, but it's pretty close.
Pretty close.
And of course, they've had people like John Isner, who went on to a very successful professional career, who came through there, and Al Parker, who was a great player, and Michael Pernfors, and so many great players. And it's just, if you've never seen it, I recommend going out and watching it. And the ticket price is great. It's free.
It's free. Yep. I'm not a tennis guy, but I'm kind of fascinated by the athleticism, mm-hmm, and I can see how it could be. You could get into it. My wife plays tennis. We had a program last week at Rotary about the '96 Olympics. Just a lot of things were going on in Athens at that time. What was where did you fit into all that from your?
Well, I had expected I would be covering the Olympics as a journalist, but was dismissed
That's right, the time
in May
that was
of that. And so I went over and volunteered as a volunteer. And I worked they call it football in the Olympics. They hosted a couple of rounds of football at Sanford Stadium. And I was part of the media press help crew that was there and worked there. And back then, they were so concerned about traffic, you had to carpool to get there. And there was like 4 or 5 people around this who lived in the same general area as we did, and we'd meet and drive over and park. And Frank Brookings was one of them. He was a well-known photographer. Colton Coyle and his son Billy was another one. And I'm trying to think if there was anybody, that may have been it. And we would go, and we dispersed and did our various things, and then would come back that night. We had 2 young girls from Sweden who were volunteers. And I remember they never had heard of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. That was a mystery to them. I never did get to bring them a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I couldn't figure out exactly how to get that through security and all. So.
You heard some stories like that here recently with the World Cup being in Atlanta, introducing the Europeans.
Oh, I know it. I know it. Yeah.
People from all over the world. Well, who's? I know you interviewed, covered a lot of people right here in Athens, Georgia. What's the most interesting, or a couple of the most interesting people you ever covered or interviewed or was able to spend time with?
Well, Herschel Walker was a very unique personality, and that from the get-go, he was thrust in front of the media as soon as he arrived, and almost every week he was there for the availability for the media. And you never knew what Herschel was going to say. I mean, he just was an interesting person to talk to. And so he was a fascinating guy. I got to know Dominique Wilkins when he was here and talked to him. you know, you look back over the years and just to try to think about all the people that you interviewed, it's hard to think about all of them at spur of the moment. I mean, I got to know Charlie Ellis, who was on the tennis team. He was #1 player. His wife played on our church softball team at the time. She was a good player. I got to know some of those baseball players. You know, Andy was there. Andy Johnson, I knew him. Charlie Winslet, I knew him when he was playing on the team. I got to interview track and field athletes. Mel Latney, who was at one time the fastest man in the world, was really denied his moment in the sun because he was on the Olympic team that did not compete when it was held in Moscow.
In
President,
80,
that's right. President Carter boycotted those Olympics, and so Mel did not get to have his moment in the sun.
Mel's still living, isn't he?
As far as I know,
Yeah,
he
I
is.
think he is.
Yeah.
I think I'm friends with him on Facebook. You know, Harvey Glantz was Auburn's version of Mel,
Yeah.
and he was in the '76 Montreal.
I used to call him Harvey at a glance.
He could
Because
fly.
he could cut it, but he could run.
Ooh, I went to the Pat Dye football camp when I was in the 8th grade, and they had Harvey come out there and give us a little some lessons on running and how to be faster. And we got to the end of the session, and they said if you ran a 4.6 or less when you came into camp, we ran the 40. We're gonna let you have a race with Harvey. 40. I'm telling you, Blake. Harvey was out there. I remember he had on a pair of long sweatpants, a pair of Nike basketball shoes, no shirt, and he had a sun visor on backwards. They got about 30 or 40 of the fastest guys at the camp, got up there. They all got down in the three-point stance. Harvey just got up and kind of crouched down. They, said go or whatever they did, and it looked like for about 20 yards, I'm like, oh my gosh, all these guys are going to outrun Harvey. And it was like something out of a Looney Tunes cartoon. He just turned it on and beat them all by 10 yards. It was the craziest thing. But you talk about those Mel Latney, it would have been the same thing.
Well, I was the weekend that Herschel wound up having to turn pro because he got mixed up with the generals and flew to New York. There was an event going on over at Old Stegman Hall, and the media was playing a basketball game that I was in. And Mel Latney was on the other team. And he got away on a fast break. And Jan says, catch him, Blake, catch him. And I turned to her and I said, this is one of the fastest guys in the world, and you want me to catch him?
It is crazy. If you see, there's some, you talk about Herschel, Bo Jackson, Willie Gault. There were a lot of great legendary track athletes. That's about the time Carl Lewis came along. But they're just SEC, Southern guys. But Herschel, back to Herschel, I think you confirm you feel the same way. To me, an 18-year-old kid getting thrust into the spotlight like he did, no matter what you think about him or him running for Senate, what's your political, he handled that beautifully.
Well, Herschel never embarrassed the University of Georgia.
Right.
While he was there, and really hadn't really embarrassed him since then. Now he's ambassador to, is it Bermuda?
Yeah, I think so.
Or Bahamas, one or the other.
He's no dummy.
Yeah.
He never was a dummy.
And so he's had quite the cachet. Just like Bo Jackson from Auburn. Bo's never embarrassed. No, Auburn's never been ashamed that Bo Jackson was one of their alumni.
That's right.
They've always been proud of him.
I do think Herschel's a nicer guy than Bo. I think Bo's a good person. He's done a lot for Auburn, blah, blah, blah. But Bo is kind of an ornery guy. But Herschel's
Do you think that had anything to do with his stuttering problem?
Maybe. I just think he's kind of, I don't know Bo, but I know people
I don't know that. I'm sure I probably interviewed him at some time or another. I don't really remember him. It's like Charles Barkley. I covered Charles when he was playing with Auburn. I may have interviewed him, but it didn't really make an impression on me if it did.
Well, I've met Bo, but I just know people that know Bo. I just think he's a kind of a grouch sometimes, which doesn't mean necessarily make you a bad person. I'm probably a grouch too. But, we'll talk about what you're doing now. I know you're a renowned Bible study, Sunday school teacher.
Well, I have retired from that as a community Bible study. I did that for like 22 years. And a guy named Tal Talmadge is stepping in my stead, and I've got a lot of confidence and praying that he'll do a great job in leading that study. So if you're living in the Athens area and you're looking for a good Bible study, they meet on the Monday nights at Alps Road Presbyterian Church, and they'll start probably the third Monday in August. You can probably find it online somewhere, how to register and everything. But I've been involved with that ministry for so many years, and I'll continue to be a participant in that. And I still teach Sunday school.
You're involved in the Bible study at the Y too, right?
Yeah, just a participant. Jerry Varnado is our Bible study leader there. He's an old defensive end for University of Georgia, going back to the 60s. He played up there in that Michigan game in '65 when Georgia went to Ann Arbor and got the big upset victory up there.
Well, you mentioned earlier you're in the gardening, and you're in Rotary, former president of Rotary.
Mm-hmm.
You said you're one of the only men that attend the Athens Garden Club?
No, it's Watkinsville Garden Club.
Watkins.
I was the first man to be president.
Oh, okay.
There are other men in the club,
you.
and they are very active members of the club, but I was the first one to be president.
So you got 3 kids. How many grandkids?
I have 5 grandkids. The oldest one is going to be a freshman at University of Georgia this year.
The 3rd or 4th generation, right?
Let's see, 3rd. I was first generation.